Welcome to the Seeds of Wisdom series. We hope you enjoy today's guest. Disclaimer: the Seeds of Wisdom digs into some deep subject matter. In order to plant a seed, we have to dig in the dirt. That's how we grow. If any of the subject matter feels like too much, it is important to seek your own mental health support. I did, and it's why I'm able to be here doing this today. Hello and welcome. I am so excited today on episode 17 of Seeds of Wisdom to have Karen Casey. And we are going to talk about her seed, the gift of detachment, for me and for you, which I have to say before she introduces herself, this is a true full circle moment for me because I first saw Karen at a Heart Wisdom panel brought on by my publisher, Mango Publishing. And when I saw her and she starts mentioning her books, I turn around on my bookshelf and I have this book, Each Day a New Beginning, that I was given in 1990, and it's still on my bookshelf. And so I was like so excited. And then I realized I had another book on my bookshelf from her. So having her here, and it's the 40th, she's celebrating the 40th anniversary of Each Day a New Beginning, and Canary Press, which is owned by Mango Publishing, put that out. Can we show your book right now? The new.
Sure. Here
So
it
is this is the old copy,
Yeah.
and that's the new one. And I'm so excited to have your name on it because I always wondered who wrote this book.
Right.
Because
Right.
your name wasn't, because it was under Hazelton at the time. So
Right.
I am so excited to have you here, and I'll let you introduce yourself and then we can dive in because this is such an important subject.
Well, thank you. I'm so excited that we were brought together, Rachel, and this is a thrill for me. And to introduce myself, let me say my name is Karen, and I'm a double winner. And what I mean when I say I'm a double winner, I've been in Al-Anon since 1974, and I went into my first AA meeting May 24th, 1976. And I have been a card carrying member of both groups ever since. So if I sound and look a little old to some of you who may see this, in fact, that's because I am. I have been around for a very long time, but I will continue to be active in both groups until there is no more me. And let me just say a little bit about this 40th anniversary edition, because Rachel held up the original edition, which was published in 1982. And that book was never intended to be written for other women. I didn't set out to write a book for women. I really was trying to journal my way to know God better. And as a result of that, the man at the time who was president of Hazelton, I knew him. I worked there in a different capacity, not as a writer, but I knew him. And he was always interested in people's recoveries. And he asked me how I was doing. And I said, well, the hardest part of my journey is to feel a connection to God. And I said, I love AA. I love going to meetings, but I really don't feel that connection very easily. So I'm journaling about it. And he said, would you mind sharing with me sometime some of what your journaling is, which I thought at the time was kind of unusual. But, he was such a nice man and we had so many conversations. So I said, sure. And when I shared them with him, I was dumbfounded when he said, Karen, I think this needs to become a book for women. And so that's what happened. Then in December 1982, it was published by Hazelton. And the irony of the whole thing is that they never, the men, and not Harry, but the other men who were in charge of the publishing arm and production, meaning getting books published, said, well, and both of them were in recovery. And they have both since passed on. I'm not going to tell you their names, but they both said, we don't need this book. We have 24 hours a day. We'll never sell this book. Let's just print 10,000 copies. And so those 10,000 copies were sold before the book ever got into the warehouse. And so it is kind of ironic that 4 million copies later, a book that was never expected to be sought by women has been sought by a lot of women and a lot of men too. So, I can't, the only thing I can claim in regards to this book is that I was willing to sit and have conversations with my higher power. And that is what really prepared me, I think, for every book since then. And there have been quite a few. I just get this calling to sit down and listen, and the messages begin to appear. And my journey, my goodness, my journey is a surprise to me. And I think probably every woman and man in recovery would say the same thing, that we didn't come in to the rooms of Al-Anon or AA expecting to have what happens happen. But, I still remember so well that first Al-Anon meeting I walked into in Minneapolis. And it was in the fall of 74. And I walked in a room full of strangers in a church. It was the first, even though it was a room full of strangers, I felt absolutely at ease. And, I think that that's one of the beauties of Al-Anon and AA too. There is that sense of hope that one immediately feels. So my life has been blessed in so many ways, Rachel. And I thought, if you don't mind, I would read just one meditation out of here.
Absolutely.
And actually, I opened this at random, and I glanced at it, and I thought, oh, this seems okay. And this is actually June 27th. And I think it's so fitting, really, for what happens on our regular journey through life. And the quote, it begins with this quote: often God shuts a door in our face and then subsequently opens the door through which we need to go. Catherine Marshall. We try to control the events of our lives, and not seldom the events in others' lives too. The occasions are frequent when our will conflicts with God's. Then, for a time, we feel at a loss. Our direction is uncertain, but always, always another door opens. A better way beckons. How stubborn we are, and how simple life would be were we to daily, fully turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. God's help and direction in all things are always available. Turning a deaf ear is like trying to find a seat in a darkened movie theater unaided by the usher. Every experience is softened when we face it, accompanied by our higher power. Any past struggle, any present fear is a testament to our attempts to do it alone. Too frequently we forge ahead, alone, only to have our way blocked. The detours need never be there. No door closes unless there is a better way. Divine order will prevail. There is no need to struggle today. I will breathe deeply and take my higher power with me wherever I go, and the doors will be open for as far as I can see. And, who knows where that came from? All I know is that for me, it was about sitting down and listening and God saying, Karen, this is how it works. And my trusting that.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's kind of how I've approached these 46 plus years, 48, counting Al Anon too, on this recovery path. That as long as I don't try to do it alone, I'm going to be okay. And as long as I don't try to mind other people's business, they will be better off as well. And I mentioned that, Rachel, and let me finish this one idea. And then there is a man named Richie who was in the Al-Anon meeting in Naples that I went to for many, many years. And Richie used to always say, and maybe you were at a meeting once when you heard him, he would always say there's two kinds of business, my business and none of my business. And that has been one of them. I ought to put a sign on every wall of my home. Is this my business? Because that really fits for us, whether we're in AA or Al-Anon or no program at all.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the perfect segue into what we're talking about today, which is detachment and why it's a gift to ourselves and to others by detaching. So first, I'd really like you to define what you see detachment as.
Okay, I think, and when I came into Al-Anon and I first heard that word detachment, honestly, Rachel, I don't know that I had ever heard that word before, which seems kind of strange. I was working on my doctorate at the University of Minnesota, so I didn't have a minuscule vocabulary, but detachment was totally unfamiliar to me. And so when I first kind of tried to understand it, I just thought it meant get away, get away from me. And I came to appreciate that detachment, you can look at it from many angles, but for me, detachment really means letting other people live the life that they were born to live. That's the greatest gift of love that I can offer them, is to just say, your journey is yours, just as mine is mine. I think that I used to feel absolutely insecure unless I was the figment of somebody else's constant attention and imagination. And so I came in, it felt like I was born codependent. I was born needing the attention of other people to feel like I was okay, because I didn't grow up in a family where I felt that sense of being okay. So to learn, to finally be introduced to another way to be, another way to see life was such a gift, to know that I can detach and enjoy my journey. And when I detach, I let you enjoy your journey as well. And it doesn't mean at all that I have any less love for you. In fact, it means I have greater love for you, because I trust that you'll make the journey you need to make. So detachment is to not pull away in a unkind way, but to pull away in a loving way, to step aside. I used to tell a sponsee of mine, think of it this way, that this is an opportunity for you simply to step aside and let somebody else have whatever experience they're having. And oftentimes it's an experience that feels unkind to us, but that doesn't mean we have to even get involved. We can just step aside and know that it's about that person at that time and us letting them be wherever they are.
It resonates so deep because learning detachment in Al-Anon, because when I came into Al-Anon, I felt like a shell of a person. I just felt like a complete shell. I felt like I was lost in a series of titles and I didn't know who I was. And so learning detachment and detaching with love and not having it be abrupt in that, feeling cold and all that, knowing that difference was such a lifesaver to me. And it helped me, once I could do that, then it helped me have that healthy boundary to say, if this is the way you want to live, that's fine, but it's not healthy for me, so I need to leave.
Right.
And it's not about an ultimatum.
Right.
I allowed the person to be who they were, and then I decided, okay, that doesn't fit me.
Right.
And it wasn't done in anger at all. It was done in, this is where I am, it doesn't match anymore.
Right. And it's really a loving acceptance of the other person and
Mhm.
wherever they need to be. And it feels so freeing to just say, we have intersected because for whatever reason we needed to, but that doesn't mean we need to be on this path in this enmeshed way for the rest of our lives. And maybe our journeys will cross paths again at some point. But right now, each of us needs to simply be who we need to be. And I think that I it's one of those concepts that I think our entire uh, country, our entire world would would be better off if they understood
Oh my
to just
goodness, yeah.
let others be instead of all of us trying, within families, within communities, country to country, instead of deciding for others how they should be living their lives, the choices they should be making.
So in preparation for this conversation on detachment, I read your book, Let Go Now, which is all about detachment. So if anyone is needing a book about detachment, this is the book. So I quote you, you're quoted, I'm quoting you in this saying, doing for others what they need to do for themselves prevents the learning that needs to occur, both ours and theirs, stepping aside and watching others handle that which is theirs to handle, and not letting what they do determine how we feel is the real stuff of this journey. Discovering this makes every minute pretty exciting. And I have to say, that passage gave me complete tingles because to me, that just rings so true. And it was one of those things that I needed to hear in that moment. Because, I'm raising a 16-year-old daughter and a 17-year-old son, and the detachment is really important at this phase.
Right.
And notice in that reminder that I need to let them do what they need to do for themselves. And it's just got me right there.
Well, letting other people's behavior, no matter who they are, define us and determine how we're going to respond is really that enmeshment that ultimately prevents us from living how a healthy life. And it really prevents them from blossoming in whatever way they need to blossom. I know that, I mean, when I look back on my childhood and a young adulthood and in the first marriage that I had, I was married once before my current husband. We've been married for 45 years, but my first husband, we were married for 12 years. And I married him because he asked me. It wasn't about love. And that was such a classic, and not that I knew a thing about detachment or attachment. All I knew is that I wanted to be asked, and he asked. And so I let his asking define me for the next 12 years. And it was just a most unhealthy and a very alcoholic relationship too, but so unhealthy. And it was all about somebody else defining me. And I mean, I can remember as a kid always watching others to see if I was okay, to
Mhm.
see what it was they maybe were thinking about me. And that kind of enmeshment, I think, is so common. I mean, I don't think it just happens to a few of us. I don't think it's just a small percentage of us who struggle with the issue of codependency. I think it is an absolute, I mean, I think it's a much broader issue than alcoholism itself.
Absolutely. Well, and even in when I started breaking free from the codependency and realizing that me being a rescuer to gain my worth was codependence. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that me wanting to rescue somebody and think that I had this, way of helping them that nobody
Right,
else could type thing. I didn't know that that was codependency. And so when I cleared that, like, and worked through that piece, it was just so freeing, and it took such a weight off.
right,
It takes such a weight off when you realize that you have no control
right.
over someone's thoughts, beliefs, behaviors. They have to have their own journey. And if you
Yeah,
fight it,
it's
you're
such a
just putting
burden.
the heaviness on yourself.
Right. It is such a burden to think that we should be in charge
Yeah.
of other people because we cannot. There is no way, no matter how hard we try, they might do something. That other person might do what we want them to do one time, but it's not because we wanted them to do it. I mean, they just decided to go ahead and do it, but it hooked us. It
Mhm.
was like, aha, see, I can control that person. And it's a huge burden, and it's like you said, it's such freedom to be able to celebrate the fact that what somebody else is going to do or think or say is not my it shouldn't be my concern. But it's something you mentioned is so familiar to me, that taking care of others was really not taking care of others. It was trying to keep them um, in bondage to me. It was trying to hold them as a hostage so
Yep.
I would feel okay. And I think that, when my first husband left, and he left as a result of another woman, I was just absolutely devastated, not because I was uh, not because of love, but because of how it was making me look, that he left me for another woman. And I think that if there's anything that speaks of enmeshment and how we try to hold someone hostage in order to feel better, or at least make others think we're okay. It's such a sad state of affairs, but I tell you, this is so much healing needs to be done around the idea of codependence.
I agree. So we need to wrap up this first segment. So
Okay.
let's what's one thing you can leave the listeners who are going to end here? What could you leave them with of why detachment is a gift for me and you?
Can I read something from
Yeah,
here? Okay.
absolutely. Is this from Let Go Now?
Yeah, Let Go
Okay.
Now. This
Okay.
is the newest edition of Let Go Now. Embrace detachment as a path to freedom. Detachment is simply watching the events that are unfolding around you, getting involved only when your journey is part of the experience. That's a quote at the top. And for the listeners, there are 200 essays in this book on detachment. Not reacting to the people or the situations that so easily attract our attention is not an easy skill to develop, and a skill it is We must practice driving and chipping and putting a golf ball in order to be good golfers. We have to hit thousands of tennis balls against a backdrop to play tennis competitively. And we have to sit for long, long hours at the piano keys in order to become proficient pianists. We would not expect to be very good at any of these activities without practice, lots of it. But we seldom grasp until after many failures, sometimes years of failures, that we have to practice and rehearse again and again the art of not reacting, of detaching from the actions of those around us. How often we hear, or worse yet say, well, he made me do it. Wrong. No one can make us do anything. Only we have the power to do or not do whatever we do. That's the good news, in fact. We are in charge of ourselves. No one else is. The freedom that accompanies this realization will lift our spirits throughout the day. Getting involved in the actions of others isn't in my best interest most of the time. I will walk away when I need to today. And that's detachment and freedom for all of us.
Oh, that reading gives me chills, which I will explain why if you continue listening on YouTube. If you're listening anywhere else and want to see the extended version, you can go to YouTube and continue on the conversation with us, where we're going to go deeper beyond the seed and really get into enmeshment and how to break free from that. So thank you for all who are ending here.
Thank you.
Okay, so that particular reading made me laugh because when I was 13, my mom said to me, I can't make you feel anything. I can't make you. That was her like mantra when I was that age. And so it was so like at the time, at that age, you don't want to hear that.
No.
And but it ended up being one of the biggest gifts of my life because it empowered me to say, these are my feelings. These
Yeah.
are these are my actions. These are my thoughts. These are my, and it has been such a huge part of my journey. And it all started with that very statement at 13.
I'll be
So I love it.
doggone. Well,
Yeah.
that would suggest that your mother really had a very healthy understanding
Yeah.
of of what detachment was, even though she probably never used the word detachment.
Yeah, she went on an extreme growth journey too at the time. So she always says we grew up together. So
Uh-huh.
so it's great because we really, I was so absorbed into learning even from a very young age. At 14, I read A Return to Love by Marianne Williamson,
Oh yeah.
and that set me on this path, on this journey. And obviously, this is called From a Loving Place, so it's still going.
Yeah.
you know
Right.
so it's one of those things that has just been building and building and building. So let's get really into this, because I know for me, I didn't know what enmeshment was. So can you talk about what enmeshment is?
Okay. Well, I don't know that early on I really knew what enmeshment was either, but enmeshment is when our lives are so entwined with others that we really don't seem to have a life of our own. And one of the books that I wrote a number of years ago for the Al-Anon journey is called A Life of My Own. And it really is trying to look at, well, it's trying to look at the whole detachment side of things. But enmeshment means that you are so fully attached with others that you are not seeing your own journey in any way as being um, your gift to yourself. You're seeing your journey as only being as important as the person walking those same steps with you. So enmeshment means that you're constantly having your own emotions mixed up with the emotions of others. It really is, well, when you think of the word mesh and enmeshment, I mean, it really implies there is no, there is simply no way that two people are walking in unison, but in fact are walking on top of each other all the way down the pathway. And I think that it's important to realize that we do walk and encounter others that we need to encounter in this life. But that doesn't mean being enmeshed with them. That means we encounter others in this life because of the lessons we all need to learn, and that we journey together, but we do not journey mixed in to each other's lives. I don't know if that, it's kind of hard, I think, to explain enmeshment, because it's a feeling as much as anything. To be enmeshed in somebody else's life means that you don't think separately at all. It's like if they're sad, oh, I'm sad too, and how can I change their sadness? Or if they're happy and I'm not feeling that, oh, I better get happy, or they might wander off without me. It's
Yeah,
really not respecting anybody's journey.
I agree. In that the enmeshment, when I first came in, didn't know anything about that. I knew about codependency, but I didn't know, like, if you weren't the one leaning, how are you codependent if you're not the one leaning? But I didn't realize it was leaning like this over them, not
Right.
that they're falling, and with the enmeshment, what someone gave me this example of, like, in a relationship, if, let's say that there's a hula hoop, you have to have one foot, each person has to have one foot outside the hula hoop in order to gain stability. If you're both just tight in it, you're both going to wobble and fall.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it. And that
Yeah.
I would agree that, yeah,
I always love that visual because it just reminded me that I have to be on my solid footing to
right,
be a healthy partner.
right.
So,
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. And being enmeshed with somebody is absolutely preventing uh, either party from being on solid footing. It's preventing either party from hearing that voice that they need to specifically hear for themselves, for the journey that they are here to make. It's like getting their own journey completely um, off balance with the other person's journey. We each have a journey,
yep.
and it's my feeling that we came here with a very divine purpose that we didn't know, but it becomes more apparent if we're willing to believe that it's becoming more apparent. I didn't come into the rooms of Al-Anon or AA with any belief in God at all. In fact, I kind of, I, I kind of thought of myself as an atheist, or for at the very least an agnostic. And I think part of that was I wasn't really raised to have any strong ties. I like so many of my friends who were raised Catholic, ended up having a lot of strong ties, and I didn't have that. Which there's the good side of that and the not so good side of that, I suppose, because I didn't have any belief whatsoever. So I remember on that first Al-Anon meeting, looking at the steps and traditions on the wall and thinking, I love the feeling here, but I don't know that I'm going to be able to stick around if you have to believe in God. And I didn't ask that question that night. I didn't ask whether or not I needed to believe. In fact, this is a funny story, Rachel, because they sent me home that night with a copy of One Day at a Time in Al Anon.
Mhm.
And I had never, ever seen a meditation book in my life. And so I kind of look back on that and think, maybe that was God's little joke on me to introduce me to a meditation book uh, before I was going to, in fact, then begin writing meditation books. But I read home that night, and my life was just such a mess because it was totally enmeshed. Everybody, I mean, the significant man in my life then was also a poor choice after my husband who had left. And I only went to Al Anon because his counselor suggested I should. And but I went home and I sat down and I read that book cover to cover, and missing entirely the point, one day at a time, one meditation at a time. And I went back that next Thursday night, and they said, "Well, now it's so good that you came back, and how are you?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just fine. I finished the book." And they all laughed and said, "Well, now maybe it would be a good idea if you started reading it again, but just a page a day." And I think that when I think back on that experience and how gently they embraced me, and nobody said, "Oh, for heaven's sake," no, nobody shamed me. I grew up in a family where you were so quickly shamed for making a mistake. And so it was just everything about it was such an invitation to return. I had no idea that I was about to experience the most profound changes in my life by going to that first Al Anon meeting. That it was the beginning of the journey that brought you and I here today.
Yeah. I mean, and that's why it's so full circle for me, because without Al Anon and what I learned in Al Anon, I would not be able to be here because
Yeah,
I could barely stand. You know, I talk about that I was so gone when I walked through those doors. Um, and in the beginning, I still was gone because it was like I was doing it for my kids. I wasn't even doing it for me. I
yeah,
was doing it because I didn't want this life for my kids. So how
yeah,
could I get better so I could give them a better life?
right, right.
And yeah, I mean, but it Al-Anon is definitely where I learned all about detachment, and I got my feet under me.
Yeah,
And then
right.
learned that concept of be where your feet are.
Yeah,
That's why I
right.
learned that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's probably, I sure never have heard that phrase anytime, any place outside of 12-step meetings, be where your feet are.
Yeah.
So I
And
think that that's where we all learned it. Yeah.
yeah, well, and then I also something that really stuck with me in the meeting, and with when you go to the programs like this, a lot of people read outside books, and so at the time, a bunch of people were reading Don Miguel Ruiz's Four Agreements when I was in there,
Mhm.
and so I was like, okay, I'm going to read this book, and it said nobody can abuse you worse than you abuse yourself. And this is how God worked in my life. So I hear this, I go into a meeting, I think like within that week, and a person in the meeting says, I love you, but I love me more. And I was like, that's it. Because I was so self-abusive that it was, I got matching energy back to me. So
Yeah.
when I could realize that if I love me more, I'm going to stand taller and be able to actually project the energy to say, no, this will not happen again.
Right.
And that's what happened. And that was a big, huge part of my journey. So,
Yeah. Isn't it interesting I think prior to going to a program like Al-Anon or AA or probably any 12-step program, the idea of focusing on loving ourselves would have been it's like, well, how arrogant or how odd.
Mhm.
And it is so key to be able to love and accept ourselves. You know, it's I think that we so often grow up in families where we didn't feel love. So we felt like we must not deserve love. So the idea of loving ourselves, it didn't even occur to me.
We
That
had to
didn't,
earn love.
yeah, right,
Yep.
right. Yeah, there was not unconditional love in my family. And as I aged and and came into the programs and kind of broadened my perspective on my parents, particularly by the changes I was making. I knew that they loved me the best they could, but it still was not. I still did not grow up feeling unconditional love. And I don't think my two older sisters or my younger brother did either. But nobody talked about unconditional love back then. I'm considerably older than you at 83. I was born in 39. In the 40s, people were just hoping that they could put food on the table because it was following the Depression. It was in the middle of the Second World War. Nobody was thinking about how do I show my children unconditional love. It was how do I make sure I have enough mashed potatoes for the supper table tonight.
It's
So,
the world was lost in the doing, and now we're back to that too. It's
right,
lost
yeah,
in the doing again.
yeah, that's true. And so, I think that one of the greatest gifts that I received from 12-step programs is the ability to not only love myself, but to be able to forgive and love those others in my life for doing what I know now was the very best that they could do. You know, I don't have I don't feel any resentments against any members in my family. And I certainly did when I was young, and I did even as I was coming into AA. There were things that I resented, and after I had been in AA for about a little over a year, I had taken a course in family of origin, and it was an interesting class, and it wasn't a class for a grade. It's just one of those workshops, really. And the instructor said, you should all take the time to go back and interview your parents or grandparents or whoever is around to find out about their lives and see how things in their lives have really rippled down into your own. And I thought, oh, that would be interesting. And so I went back. I was living in Minneapolis at that time because that's where Bill, my first husband, and I had moved up here to Minneapolis so that he could go to graduate school, actually. And but I went down to Lafayette, my hometown, and I said and they both knew why I was coming. And I think that because I had been kind of a troubled kid and young woman, and who had a divorce, nobody in the entire family on either side had ever been divorced, and here I was, an alcoholic and in AA, and not that there weren't a few alcoholics falling off of the family tree here and there, but nobody else had ever sought help for any kind of an alcohol problem. So I think that when I said I want to come home and talk to the two of you, I think that they were a nervous wreck, actually. And so that morning when we got up, and I said to my mom, I said, well, shall we talk first? And she said, okay. And we went into the living room and sat down. And I said, Mom, and all I said was, Mom, tell me about your life. And she just began to cry. And I was so taken aback. I had that was not my expectation. And she started to cry and she said, I never felt like a good wife or a good mother. And I didn't want you when I was pregnant for you. And I'm afraid that's why you're an alcoholic. And she just sobbed. And so I sat there and put my arms around her and said, no, no, no. That's got nothing to do with my alcoholism. But I said, tell me about the fact that you didn't want me to be pregnant. And she said, well, her first two pregnancies had been very difficult. And Dr. Cole, who was our family doctor, had said to her, you know, Thelma, you probably shouldn't have any more children. And my dad wanted a son. So she got pregnant and she really was having a tough time and she really didn't want to be pregnant. And so I felt that her sharing that with me, I felt a whole panoply of things. But number one, I felt for the first time, it seemed to answer why I had felt that sense of abandonment my whole life. That her feeling that way when I was in the womb really had imprinted me. And then I think her shame at feeling that made it really hard for her to ever embrace me the way she wanted to when I was young. Mm-hmm. And then to live with that for, in essence, probably close to 38 years, to live with that secret, because she could never have told my dad. And so she revealed to me that that's how she had felt. And it brought us so close. And, you know, I think that we don't expect so many things in our lives to happen as they happen. But the beauty that I have grown to trust in my many, many years on this journey is that we do find out what we need to know. We do learn what we need to learn. And that somehow things are revealed to us when we're ready to hear them. And I was ready at that point for my mother to speak her truth. And when I think back on that, my mother passed away at 90, so that was a few years ago now. It was in 1998, in fact. But you know, when I think about the relief that offered her, no wonder she and I developed such a bond after that. So, you know, it's all about giving people the opportunity to tell the truth. You know, and that's not necessarily related to our topic here today, but it's so important, I think, for us all to remember to be good listeners and to listen in a loving, kind way. And that doesn't mean getting enmeshed. It just means being present to somebody else's story.
I do think it relates to today, though, because I feel like you need to learn the art of detachment in order to accept hearing and listening to that.
Well, that's a good way to put it. Oh, thanks.
Yeah, because if you think about it, if you haven't learned that, to know that their actions and your worth are not linked, that their feelings at the time is not linked to your worth, that could have taken you down a self spiral.
Right.
But because you knew when you went in, this does not define my worth.
Right.
It allowed you to be there for her.
Right.
I mean, talk about a gift.
It was a huge gift
to both of you.
It was a huge gift to both of us. And you know, when I think back, she used to come down to Florida in the winters and stay with Joe and I. And you know, I mean, it was just so it was just such a lovely connection that we developed. And it was all because of listening to her truth. And we all need a listener.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean I didn't try to change any of it for her. I didn't, all I said was, it wasn't your fault. You don't need to feel responsible for my alcoholism. And I told her at the time, I said, Mother, I'm so glad you shared that, because now I can understand why I had that feeling of abandonment. And I know that you loved me as much as you could, you know? So yeah,
That is so freeing.
life is so full of just wonderful, rich rewards if we are just willing, if we dare to experience them.
And that's what I love. Like, this is why I do this. This is about digging deep. It's digging in the dirt. It's getting down into it, because that's where we grow. We have to dig down to plant the seed, you
Right.
know, and that's where it all begins. And if we're not willing to dig into the dirt, we're not going to grow a garden.
Yeah.
So, I am so grateful that you came here today and said all you did, because it's so powerful, and it's so important to learn detachment, to be there and be able to be present and listen to other people, and it just reiterated that point to me, of that reminder that whatever someone else is doing does not define me,
Right.
even if they are my child, even if they are my partner, even if they are my parent. They do not define who I am.
Right.
It's,
Yeah. When my first husband left, talk about being defined. There were so many times, Rachel, that, we'd go, he was like an intellectual, and I was at that period of time a third grade teacher. And he often kind of uh, implied that I didn't know much because I was just a third grade teacher. And then just an aside, he never finished his PhD, but I went to graduate school and I got one. So I've always thought I wasn't just a third grade teacher. I got a PhD in the same program he was in. But at any rate, when we would go to a movie, and afterwards he would say, "Well, what do you think of that?" And I would, oh my gosh, I would so desperately try to think, now what did he think of it? So that I could say what he maybe would think, so that then he could look at me and say, yeah, I think you're right.
gosh,
Talk about being defined by somebody else. And then that first night I was alone in the kitchen after he walked out. I can remember standing there thinking, I don't even know what to cook, because I had always said, what do you want for supper, Bill? And
mm,
that's what I would cook. It's like not having a life of my own was exactly who I was for a whole lot of years.
yeah, I did. After I got divorced, I had a love affair with myself.
Oh,
So I
it's
did all the things that I wanted a partner to do for me, I did for me.
oh, oh
And
my.
it was funny, because then I got to this point where, like, I don't need anybody. Like,
Yeah.
I am happy. I love my life. Everything's wonderful, all this stuff. And then, I just used, like, at some point I was just like, okay, I'm going to open the doors and invite somebody in if they compliment where I am. And right through a back door, my son was learning how to fish, and I reached out to somebody that I had known since I was 10 years old, just about fishing for my son. And we've been together, 8 years now.
Oh, wonderful.
But I had to have that love affair with myself so that I can know who I was.
Oh, that is such a healthy thing. See,
Yeah.
I just was, that's not who I was then at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I admire you for doing that. And I mean, I've spent years and years in Al-Anon doing it the long, hard way. And not that I regret any of my
Yeah.
time in Al-Anon, but you know, I didn't know how to just go about loving myself. I didn't.
Yeah, I didn't realize how critical it was until that Don Miguel Ruiz quote from Four Agreements of, you can only, and I'm probably botching the words up, but it was, you can only be abused as much as you abuse yourself. So I'm like, well, I'm sick of this pattern.
Right.
I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
So I
I think in
I
the Four
stopped the
Agreements
self
too
abuse.
wasn't in the Four Agreements the idea don't take things too personally.
Don't take anything personally. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
because and you know that's one of the things that also fits into that whole concept of codependence and enmeshment.
Hmm.
You know, we take things too personally. We don't stop and say that's their idea, their opinion. That doesn't need to define me at all. This is who I am in this moment.
Well, and learning that really helped me question when I do take things personally, or when I am like beating, like if I don't tend to beat myself up anymore, but what I do is I'll look at, am I doing this right? Am I, you know what I mean? I'll start questioning myself, and I look at it and go, okay, this is an area I need to work on because it's my reaction. So if I'm reacting to it, it's something I have to work on strengthening within me because I am agreeing with someone's assessment of me for some reason, some insecurity in me. So
Right,
it's like, okay, it's an opportunity to work on that part.
right,
Get it
exactly.
back up.
Yeah, you know, it's like if we can reach that point with ourselves to see everything as an opportunity to move forward instead of being diminished, you
Hmm.
know, and I really think that's the primary lesson for us. Everything is an opportunity to move forward. And you know, nothing is nothing, no person we meet, no experience we have has come our way accidentally. You know, one of my favorite ideas, really, that has guided me for a long time is that there are no accidental visitors on our path. That everybody who has crossed my path, we have need to meet each other. And maybe it's only momentarily, maybe it's just to say hello and wish one another well. Or maybe it's for a deeper discussion. Or maybe it's for a much deeper relationship or friendship. But it's not, nobody comes along accidentally. And everybody, everything is helping us each to fulfill the purpose we have here.
I
You know,
agree. I completely agree. The most toxic relationship in my life helped me realize that I had a faulty definition of love, and that I
mm,
was living by a faulty definition of love. I was confusing love and fear.
yeah,
So without that, I wouldn't have seen that so clearly to be able to redefine it for myself and start living a new definition. I
right,
needed that to launch me into to be able to love myself and others the way I want to.
right, right,
And, some people think I'm crazy, but I am grateful for the experience. I'm grateful for all the things that happened to me because not that I wish any of them on anybody,
right,
but they helped me be where I am now, which I'm very grateful for.
right. Well, you know, I had been I hate the word victim, but I had been sexually abused as a young girl when I was probably about 10. And it happened more than once with this individual who was on the fringes of the family. And I never told anybody. because in my family, it wasn't the kind of family that I felt that they would embrace me, but say, what did you do? I mean, that's just, and it wouldn't have been because of lack of love, but just they wouldn't have understood. And they would have just assumed that somehow I was a participant. And it was much, much later in life, working with a counselor, that I came to the realization, not that it was a great gift, but that it was an opportunity for me to truly embrace forgiveness in a deep, deep way. And I think that it really changed my life. And I would, he would be present at large family gatherings. And when I had reached that point, prior to that, I skirted away. But when I reached that point, I was really able to actually be in his presence and know that only wounded people wound others. I mean, I had come to truly understand that. And it really, that whole thing really shifted so much for me, because, our need to forgive, no matter what the circumstance, our need to forgive is what will finally bring us together. And it's the joining together, like it says in A Course in Miracles, like Mary Ann said, I'm sure, in A Return for Love. And by the way, I don't know if you knew, but Mary Ann wrote the foreword. I've known Mary Ann for many years, and she wrote the foreword for the 40th anniversary edition of Each Day a New Beginning. And ultimately, it's about us coming into that loving connection to each other. But that's so much, to have a loving connection does not mean having an enmeshment with someone else. It means appreciation of one another. It means being an expression of love, but not trying to control it. The greatest gift we can give each other is our rapt attention, our forgiveness, and our willingness to free one another to be who we need to be.
And with that, it's time to go. I could go on with this conversation for hours and hours. So thank you so much for coming on. I'm so grateful. This has been such a true gift. So thank you. And if you're listening, trust that if you're here, you're meant to be here.
Yes. Thank you so much. I so appreciate your invitation.
Thanks. Make sure to follow the links that accompany this episode. You will learn a lot more about today's guest and see what they have going on now. You will also get all the links to follow them on their journeys if this seed resonates with you. Come back next week for another Seed of Wisdom. If you loved what you saw or listened to, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.